Hello and welcome back with me, fLukedMC. We are back with a tutorial video. Now, a couple of days ago, a new snapshot was released in the form of Snapshot 22W11A. This snapshot added a bunch of new things that we can preview before 1.19 releases, including things like the deep dark and frogs. But today, I actually want to focus on some of the new blocks. These are the blocks I'm going to be focusing on. Over here, we have the frog lights. This is all of the new mangrove wood, and over the back there is the mud, which was quite a surprise. I don't think I'd heard anything about mud or mud blocks, although mangrove wood had been previously announced. So today I've come up with a few ideas of how we can use some of these new blocks in our builds. The first thing I've got is this. Over on the left here, naturally, we have melons. This is the normal melon block. This is a melon stem. Now, if you look at the textures between the muddy mangrove roots and the melon, they look very similar, but this actually looks more like a rotten melon. So we can kind of give that impression of our crops kind of rotting if we leave them alone too long. Next up, I've set up a little bit of a pond here, and the first thing you'll see is this. I've got one of those mangrove trapdoors, and I've just put a lantern on top. Now, the lantern does perfectly cover that hole there, but I think because of this ring, it just works a lot better than any other trapdoor we've got so far. And of course, trapdoors can be waterlogged, so they can be placed on the surface of the water. Over here, I've taken some of the mangrove roots and I've put them in the water because I kind of get the impression that these look a little bit like lobster cages or fish cages. The things you just put in the shallows of the water and to catch some fish. And the mangrove roots can in fact be waterlogged. I did see apparently that you could put fish in here, but in my testing I wasn't able to get the fish to stay inside of the block. They all just kept flopping outside of it. Now, next up, I've been messing with some kind of lamp designs using this same trapdoor. In here we have shroom light, glowstone and sea lanterns. And I think they look alright, but what looks better than these are the new frog lights in here. They have a little bit of a tint, a yellow, a green and a sort of purplish, but these work very well with these new trapdoors as a light source. And you can see as well, because of the shape of these trapdoors, you can make a pretty decent traffic light as well. Now, this on the ground is a sort of sewer system. I've always been trying to figure out the best way to make a sort of drain and sewer that runs alongside a more modern build, because naturally, with the ability to crouch and swim, we can swim through these. And whilst we have these crimson trapdoors that work very well for these long segments, for these corner segments, we didn't really have a good trapdoor for it. But now that we've got the mangrove with the circular and the little hole in the middle, I think this works very well in creating that sort of drain aesthetic. And the last thing I want to touch on with these lights for the moment is I just put some of these new frog lights behind some ladders, and I think it gives just a touch of color. It's not overpowering, but it also lights up the ladder as we're moving up it. Moving on from that, we have this. This is a very basic sort of color palette that I was testing out. You can see in the middle here, we have the new mud block. On the left here, I have blackstone, which you can see is quite a bit darker than this. And over here, we have deep slate, which is quite a bit lighter. And the best block I found that complements mud very well is deep slate tiles. And you can see here, I've just created a very basic path design with the deep slate tiles and the mud sort of being the kind of flatter segments to complement these textures. Equally here, I have another color palette and it's all centered on the packed mud. I just want to take a moment because that's a heavy sound. I love the sound of packed mud. Now you can see here, I was trying to formulate a good color palette for the browns, and I think this side with the concrete powder and the wool has worked out quite well. And over here we have jungle wood, which seems to mix in very well, although it might not be perfect with that palette. Now, the first thing I thought when I started putting these together is I created this basic dirt plot, and this packed mud could do very well as sort of tire tracks going through this very barren sort of road. But moving on from that, I decided to then take things one step further, and I've built this entire house. I've used jungle logs there as a sort of pillars. I've used the new mud bricks as a sort of base, and I've used these just packed mud blocks for texture. Jungle wood goes very well with the new mud block, and jungle wood has always been kind of out of place with the other wood blocks because it's kind of had this odd colouring to it and it's not been the best to look at. But now that it can fit in with mud, jungle wood might be getting used a lot more often. I've also made this other path design here, just packed mud in the middle and the bricks on the side, and this looks really good. And I'm now just realising it sounds great to walk on as well. I really do like how with these new updates and these new blocks we're getting, that there's a lot more kind of attention going into the sound design. It's not just the basic stones that are happening. Each block seems to be getting its own different sound effects. And I think that really started with blocks of netherite. You can see here, blocks of netherite sound so good when placed down. No other metal such as diamond or gold or emerald makes these noises. I then wanted to experiment a bit more with these mangrove leaves because they have a sort of odd texture compared to normal leaves in that they are just basically vertical, and I thought they might work better than the other leaves we've got for vines. So I've created this basic vine wrapping around this monolith here, mixed in with some moss block and some jungle leaves, and I really like how that's turned out. I may have overdone it a bit with how many vines there are, but I think mangrove leaves are going to end up being my new favorite leaf block to use in terms of nature and overgrowth, particularly because mangrove roots have a very similar texture and can create a sort of dead vines look. You can have it so that it looks like there was life there at one point, but now it's very barren. This could do well in a very old build or even just in a build like a desert where there's maybe not that much life going on. Take this to the next level. We've also got this here. This is just a basic hedge made out of azalea leaves and moss blocks, and that looks pretty good. But then you look over here and you can see it's basically the same design, but it's just aged and dead and decrepit. It's what happens if this didn't get the life it needed and was just left to age. Now moving on from that, this is a design I found on Reddit using the stripped mangrove logs. Now this is a very kind of oriental, kind of Japanese inspired type of build, which is not something I'm particularly familiar with, but this color seems to fit very well with it, and particularly once you start introducing the frog lights back, they look sort of like those paper kind of lights they get. So if you're looking to make a very kind of oriental style build, this sort of design could work out very well. As I kept looking on at these mangrove logs and seeing how red they were, I couldn't help but think that this has actually looked better in the nether. But you can see here, by just adding it in, having some soul lanterns and some soul campfires, I think this red would work very well in a nether based build, particularly if it was complemented by the crimson stem. These are just a few ideas that I came up with, and like I said, I'm particularly happy with the overgrowth. If it comes down to nature, I'm going to be really all over that. If you see my Liebercraft series and the amount of vines and overgrowth that's going on the island, something like this would make a big difference to what I could build there. I can see there's going to be so much possibility with these blocks, and particularly once we actually get to see the new mangrove biomes. And naturally in this video I've only touched on these blocks here. I've not mentioned like things like the sculpt or the deep dark or anything like that. There's actually still so much more to this update that can make a difference to how we build things. So I hope this has given you some inspiration of what you can use these new blocks for and some of the creative ways in which everything can be used. But that's all for me for now. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.